Hello, I'm Brad Kelly, and you're listening to Method and Madness. This is a show about books, the people who write them, and the labyrinth to be explored between the words.
Have you ever heard about Willie the Weeper? Had a job as a chimney sweeper. He had the dope habit and he had his band. Listen while I tell you about a dream he had.
Andrew Edwards is the author of King of Dogs and Crowbar. As a writer, his work is marked by a rare poetic muscularity, a glory in the sentence and the image, and plots as harrowing as a bare nerve. You'd call the work paranoid if it didn't have a certain tobacco-stained fearlessness and a fearsome right hook. Crowbar is one of the best books I've ever read, and certainly one that ranks among the absolute best new work on offer in any pub, self, indie, or trad. I'm very pleased to have Andrew back for another Melee, and I'm encouraging everybody to go get their copy of Crowbar right now. Also, get King of Dogs if you haven't read that. I understand the King of Dogs on Audible. I know it was on sale at one point. I don't know if it still is, but go get that as well. It's Andrew reading it. When Andrew Edwards is an even bigger deal a few years from now, you'll be able to say you were in on it before everybody thought it was cool. Andrew, again, thanks for coming back. I think you're the first repeat Melee guest, so I really do appreciate your time and coming to hang out with me for a little bit. Lots of exciting stuff happening with Crowbar. I can't encourage people enough to pick up this book. Strongest possible encouragement from me. But you're hitting the whole podcast trail and doing things to kind of make this thing happen. And so far, it seems like it's working. People are paying attention. That's awesome. I want to try to avoid spoilers too much in this conversation because so much of this book is about that just page-turning amazement as you're going. But maybe we could start with, what is your sort of elevator pitch for Crowbar?
Oh, okay. So I was thinking about this last night. I think it's on the back of the book. It's like, what did I say? Well, I've had a few of them. Like it's like Michael Mann meets David Lynch, and then what was the other one? James Ellroy, mind flaying David Lynch into the arms of Dostoevsky. But as far as I like that too. But as a tagline, it's actually not that great because you kind of gotta get some behavioral description in there or something. But I think how about this? So I think it's like one part hard-boiled noir set in the 1980s and another part psychogenic fugue, a la what we expect from David Lynch.
Yeah. No, I like that. I co-sign that totally. Yeah, for sure. I got a bunch of questions and directions to go with this. I want to start, and this is a question I already asked you in our previous conversation about King of Dogs, but I'm curious about it here. What was the first thing that's in this book that came to you, if you can remember?
Good question, man.
I'm interested in how the dream comes in. You know what I mean? Like, what's the entry point?
Okay, yes. I was hoping we could kind of talk about some of this. So the real part of it started in about 2017. I remember driving, at that time I was living in Portland and I was not married, and I was working concrete, which can be very difficult. And then my thing back then was every day I would go to this hot yoga class, which was also extremely grueling. If you've never done one of those classes, you might think, I don't know, that it's sort of a cakewalk, but so I would do both of these and just try and sleep, I was having some trouble sleeping at that point in my life. But I think that what I did was sort of pierce something, or it was already pierced and I was beginning to make sense of it. So here's what would happen. I would be driving around and I would sort of find myself, elements of that show up in Crowbar it was sort of as if I was just being exposed to those things with no real context or understanding. And I knew that it was something. It wasn't as if some ideas will come to you Oh, alien visits Earth and then kids take care of him. Like that's pretty fun, like that could be a hit. It's
Right.
got, as the Hollywood people say, like it's got um blockbuster qualities. This was not that, dude. This was like coming from I was looking at the whole thing from the farthest possible point of understanding. But I knew in my gut, like this is something is I knew I wasn't hallucinating. I knew I wasn't losing my mind. But I also knew that like I was observing or thinking about just I mean, another way to say this is people talk about the daemon. I think we mentioned this before. I'm pretty sure that there is something like this, and it's a very real thing. And how we relate to it, maybe, as individuals, is probably very different, like, man to man. But anyway, I won't give too much away. You having read it, know. There's some things that happen in a sort of backroom world, if you will, and those were the things that were being shown to me. And it was I was like, man, this is nothing I'd ever thought of before, nothing I'd ever seen before, nothing ever heard before, which is oftentimes, we have ideas as writers, and you realize pretty quick, like, I don't know, that's kind of derivative, or oh, I'm probably, nobody would understand it or something. So I started taking little voice notes on my phone and then just making these bizarre notes about it. And I sat on that and developed it for a long time, 4 or 5 years, until I started to, then, Jay and Al, the Rhodesians, sort of fell in after that. And once, and then of course the 1980s had fallen in as well. So it was kind of just, it was almost as if, again, I started from some other perspective, pushed all the way through, and then it was all kind of there by the time I was done, if that makes any
Oh, that's
sense.
amazing. Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. Yeah, one of the sort of analogies, and it's a little silly, but it works for me as an image of the sort of developing the novel idea process. Do you remember back in like, I mean, I used to play video games. I gave up video games like people give up heroin. It's been years since I played one, but there used to be this game, Katamari, where you started as like a ball or something, or you rolling up a ball, and you just ended up picking up everything like in the city, and you're trying to like basically have this enormous ball that had all the buildings and cars and people in it. And sometimes I feel like that's like you start with this like little piece of dark matter, and
Yeah.
it's you don't even really understand what it is exactly, except you can't stop thinking about it. And
Yeah.
then as you roll along, like certain stuff just sticks to it. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, yep, that makes sense. Yeah. Like at some point, I'm sure you were like, yeah, the 1980s, obviously. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's where it
Yeah.
should happen. Right. And it just kind of gathers itself almost, as long as you kind of keep rolling the ball and keep pushing it forward. Yeah. That's really cool. And you
Uh,
can feel that in Crowbar, that it's like a bunch of different stuff that if you were to make a list of it, maybe it wouldn't seem obvious what the through line is. But when you put it all together, it's like a tuning fork that's just vibrating the whole time you're reading this book. So
that's a good way to say it. It's like it's almost that's how it feels too. Is once it's like a note. It's like it's not inarguable. Like that is that's the
mhm,
chord A minor or something. It's not
right.
negotiable. But what you just said reminds me a lot of actually David Lynch's thing about fishing, where he would go into his mind. He would clear his mind and he would get a little bit of bait or a great idea and then use that like a little minnow to catch a bigger fish. And it's very similar to.
Right.
I think that's pretty accurate. What you're saying, the snowballing idea happens.
Yeah, it just picks things up. It's really cool, and it's definitely happening here in Crowbar. I'm curious too. I mean, I've kind of heard you talk about this, and you and I have talked about it a little bit, but you know, there's a lot of writers that listen to this show and readers. It's for both, and hopefully we're getting people to read new books and different books. But um, for the writers out there, I am curious to hear you talk about what limitations you set for yourself on this project. Now, you've got all these ideas. You're clearly a talented guy. You got King of Dogs already done, which is a great book. So you got some weight you can throw around creatively. But what were the things that you said, I'm going to do this and not that? What are the boundaries that you set for yourself?
That's it. I usually start out with, or I have kind of, maybe I've developed, like we do, a set of sort of rules that I take into every project, more like craft stuff. But with this one, and that's like adverbs, Stephen King long ago told us when we read his book, like, hey, don't use, and when I was like, damn, I was thinking about this the other day, how that really helps you, or helped me anyway, develop a capacity to move clauses around in the sentence, and then to totally, and that once I did that, like my whole capacity, I felt like, to control everything changed. And that's all just because of
Yes.
adverbs, really. With this book, it's my second book, so I had to, or I thought it would be wise to sort of consider length in total. And maybe some people would advise, well, now's the time to go big, go with your 450 page, sweeping, multi-generational sort of thing. But I thought, I don't know, maybe short and sweet. I wanted to hit 55,000 words, and I hit 56. And I did work at that. I mean, I trimmed, and when you took an early look at Crowbar and made a few comments, and when I processed those, the solution that I arrived at was just to go back to those constraints. I actually just yanked a couple of scenes. It was like, well, what if I just delete these? Like this whole, because there was a section there where it kind of got a little bit out, and I was like, well, I'll just pull both of these. And then the whole rhythm that I was trying to establish fell back into place. I was like, man, short and sweet, at like every level. What else to say as far as constraints? In terms of I guess it all comes back to trying to hit that I was actually thinking 200 pages, but when I printed it, and I could have crammed it into something like with smaller font or what have you, but it's
Right.
it's like 240, but it feels like a novella, I think, probably to most people.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, there were some others, and that are a little bit more like esoteric, maybe, about like exposition, and but that ended up just kind of working itself out. I didn't have to do a lot. It wasn't really like, oh, I'm getting too wordy here, as the kind of like the authorial voice inserting himself in there. It just kind of flowed, and I do insert a few places, but yeah, it was just really about keeping it as pure and just condensed and compressed. I remember just for the past year of writing, it was just like compression, 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 and
Yeah.
yeah, that really helped.
No, it comes across. I mean, that comes across. It's clear that you've done that. I mean, for people who haven't read it yet, this thing it it's incredibly tight. And I listened to your conversation with Jack on Book Club from Hell, and he sort of was talking about how like ends up being the perfect length, because as a reader you wouldn't sort of you almost wouldn't be able to sustain the sort of cognitive attention you need. And it's not that it's dense or hard to understand necessarily, or getting far out there and abstract. It's just that there's so much happening in such a tight space that you have to operate at this, as a reader, even at this pace, which is exhilarating. But it would eventually, you would sort of get exhausted with it, but that's not a bad thing. It's just like take your favorite song out there. Well, now imagine that song was 45 minutes long. It
Yeah,
wouldn't work.
right. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, no, I love that. And I like this thing about, because I did kind of want to talk about grammar and syntax a little bit, and maybe some people will find this boring. I don't find it boring at all. One thing I've always found interesting is I when I'm doing later passes on drafts and stuff, sometimes I will just say, well, I need to cut out 5% of this by word count.
Yeah.
And it's sort of an arbitrary goal in a way, but it's weird how setting yourself up that goal forces you to look more closely at like every sentence, because like maybe I can get the word the out of here.
Yes.
and then
I
you
mean,
end up and then you
yeah.
end up like yeah, you end up rearranging the sentence. You're like, oh, that's actually a way better sentence because I got that one or two words out of there, or that little phrase that's redundant or whatever. Now the whole thing is way better, and it can be, as a writer, I guess at moments it's kind of tedious maybe, but ultimately like that. I think that process like really comes across for the reader. At least I hope it does, to make the whole thing feel sort of special and unique and sort of it's complete its own thing. It's operating on its own sort of wits and set of rules, aesthetic and otherwise. Yeah, I mean, this is part of the reason I like it. Is your book so much is I can feel you working through a lot of the same things that I've worked through. Not that I would come up with Crowbar necessarily, because this is clearly like Andrew Edwards' special genius developing this book. But on many levels, I can feel myself like having thought through a lot of the similar problems and challenges and opportunities, I guess, as a writer that you have. And so it's so cool to see it like just done at like the Olympic level.
Thank you.
There like a couple other kind of things in this direction. And I'm just curious, sort of almost like your own self evaluation. I mean, the way I sort of see a novel more generally, Crowbar or any other, there are sort of a handful of dimensions that one is operating in, right? There's sort of themes, and there are circumstances or premise kind of stuff. There are characters, there's plot, there is the language. All of these obviously feed off each other and work together. What do you feel like you prioritize one of these things over the other, like plot over language or characters over premise? Or is there like a area that you feel like is the most important to you, or you're maybe the best at doing, like that feels like your strong suit?
No, I feel like where you were kind of heading on the first part of that, where it's sort of like maybe like a dinner or something, where if I show up with this great soup, but then my sandwich is like smeared with, I don't know, there's a piece of toilet paper
Yeah,
on it or something. You're like, dude, I don't care
right.
how good your soup is. You just put a piece of toilet paper in my sandwich. Like, I'm over it. So I think that
Yeah.
it's really about, I mean, there are things maybe I've spent more time doing. So maybe those aspects are a little bit more developed, but this may be a useful thing for yourself or the audience, that has helped me a lot. I mean, it more than helped, like it's kind of defined, how far, wherever I've gotten to thus far. And that is, you have these two Davids, in David Milch, who's Deadwood and NYPD Blue and others, and then you have David Mamet, who we don't, probably need. You guys, actually, your thing on Glenn Ross,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
that was a great episode.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Very nice. Yeah.
so I'm super familiar with both of these guys, and I think they're both geniuses, in their way, and they come down. If you listen to them carefully, they're both pretty extreme in their opinions. Where David Mamet will say essentially, like, there is no character. This is all totally empty, and the only he's I think it's Aristotelian in its origins or something. Like, all there is the story, which all that is I have a hero. He has one big, like, end goal, his teleological end point, and so the entire story can be reduced just simply to, I think he uses the example, like, I need to save the queen. So as I move backwards in the steps, the first step is actually just finding out where the silverware is. And then the next step is taking the silverware to the pawn shop to sell it, to get the money, to get the ticket, to drive. That's his whole thing. And so
Mm.
I'll try and flesh this out a little bit. David Milch, on the other hand, has said something like, structure or plot are the tools of the fearful. And so he is taking he is just diving in completely on the level of like, really, he I think he would say the subconscious or the spiritual element of this thing that we're all partaking in, literature, stories, what have you. And so I've been sitting with these two dudes for 20 years, and their sort of theories, and they seem to me to be sort of dialectical. They're opposing in a way, but
Yeah.
if you look at David Milch's material and then you listen closely, he'll say things like, I can work it into anything when I get to that point where I need to add structure. And if you read, on the other hand, David Mamet put out a novel maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and it was about reporters. I don't remember the title, but dude, read that novel, and it's like he's it's almost to seem like you're just full of shit, David Mamet, because these characters are phenomenal. Like their dialogue, and they like he really has thought about. I think it's set in the 1930s or 40s and something. And so he's got these two journalists who are like, they're very capable writers. And so their dialogue is just phenomenal. I mean, it's like
Oh, yeah.
Shakespeare, you just sit with it and you're like,
Right.
that meme of Moliere or whoever's just dropping the papers when he sees Amadeus's,
Yeah, right.
it's like that. You're just like, Jesus, man, like how good can you get, dude?
Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
I
I
guess
gotta check that out for sure.
it's super good. And I mean,
Yeah.
both of those guys, I have just a really, a soft spot for each of them. But I'll just add, like, I know for a couple of things, like David Mamet's internal experience, if you will, like his spiritual reality is much more kind of traditional, whereas David Milch, he made a statement one time that he had taken acid more successive days in a row than the entire audience who he was speaking to at this time had taken combined in all their lives. And it's probably the truth. Like,
Wow. Okay.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I think they're both sort of picking a place to stand and then working the rest out.
On the table in the living room, there's a kilo of cocaine piled high on a polished oak Lazy Susan, clear and green liquor bottles, others brown and without any labels, and several water bongs stood next to one side of the Coke, Dire Straits on the stereo, communique, massive speakers, walnut-heavy enclosures, Sony Hi-Fi, Pioneer P3A, a vast buffet, all homemade, Corningware, organic stews. There was no center here, no stable pinion from which to swing. Nick's sand dipped. Sand slipped off. Al glances to Jay, directs his gaze out to the back deck where Cohen is speaking with a tall hippie woman and drinking from a bottle of champagne. Rangy bikers in leather jackets paced. Do you want some below? Jay sent a look back. Again, the undercurrent is somehow round, whole but alien. Heavy hints of sex, money, violence on the top. The bikes outside starting. Volume, cacophony from multiple stereos, and cocaine in lines and piles, smeared on the furniture, on faces. Dust. Jay dips a finger. Interesting. Deadhead girl, smoke show. She glides by on rarefied air, parts time-space. 19 and 1982, she carries 3 ice-cold bottles of beer clutched between fingers. Beads of cooler water run down the glass. Sweat runs on her bronzed skin. Flawless. Jay saw. Jay appraised. Jay may have impacted, because in the stretched moment as she glides, antenna inside of her caught him looking, and this is America, but it is also beyond America. Beyond 1982 or the Grateful Dead. This is all flying by at tremendous supernatural speeds. This is existence as such, as it is to dreamers. And as happens in dreams, chance collisions pulse to union with zero assessment. Electricity wills out. Her arm rises. The beer he receives. The smile. Nubile, athletic, death wrapped on life. Teeth, pearls, Aphroditic, Abraxas, the cool against his rough hand. Long golden brown hair swept slow motion. Sawn and polished ends of the Lupera barrels slipped below his jacket hem. He had it hung on the shoulder thong of his own design. The Rhodesians, as a pair, to the observer, appear lifted from some vital, weather-beaten world and set upon this opaque frontispiece. Smacked of Goya, just a touch. Smacked hard of Hammershot or Vermeer. Precise. Cohen passed through with barely a glance. Blotto. Is this the place they call heaven, Al? A man in jeans, bearded and tan, jubilant, trucker hat, full-throated, he said, No, it's fucking Oregon, friend. Eugene, Oregon. It's Oregon, Jay. On the David Mamet thing, our last conversation, and I also want to ask, I got a question about LSD for you because LSD plays a prominent role in Crowbar as well. But on the David Mamet thing, the last time when we talked on this show, we talked about, we were talking about King of Dogs. You had mentioned this, and it didn't fully register for me how significant it was, but until sort of afterwards, you had mentioned this sort of concept that David Mamet presented that had stuck with you, where basically he suggested that the writer has to go through the same process or journey, I guess, as the protagonist.
Yeah.
And I think there's some real truth to that. And I'm curious how, and I can see that in King of Dogs based on conversations with you. And that's got this one guy doing a thing, right? I mean, that's boiling it, simplifying it. But fundamentally, it's got a guy and a thing's happening to him and he's going through it. How do you feel like that David Mamet concept translates for you to Crowbar? Does that still ring true? Does it ring true in some way?
It does. It absolutely does. It's just at another level of abstraction. It's like, I don't mean to be esoteric with that, but
No, it's all right.
like, it's a lot of aspects of Crowbar are, elements of personal, like interior ideas or experiences or reflections or ways to frame the world that I've toyed around with over the years. And I think that, where Crowbar winds up, in terms of like, to avoid the spoiler thing, like there's a collision between the criminal underworld and the, let's say, spiritual underworld. And so for me, basically maybe since, I don't know, maybe the past decade or so, trying to confront or engage with, my own mortality, and spirituality and these things at an adult level, like I'm kind of on the backside of life already, like you sort of go from 40 to like, fuck, I'm 50 or something, and it,
Right.
Yeah, dude. So if you're going to make some choices, like you better do those now, unless you want to wind up like Sheriff Bell, in No Country. Like I just sort of thought God would come into my life. And so my take was like, no, dude, if you want God to come into life, you need to daily do this every day, something. Like I don't necessarily want to force I don't believe even that people need to believe in this one thing, or I'm not about that, like I make my choices, and anyway, so the Crowbar is kind of like that in at this other level of abstraction. I have undergone a similar sort of journey, perhaps, where I've kind of had to make some sacrifices, like set down childish things, but also like accept the fact that all the cards are already on the table. Like I've already placed my bet in life. And so if I don't play this hand out with everything I have, I will, like a lot of people do. I think, you end up like, fuck, what could have been, and I was
Right.
like, no, dude, let's just go for broke. Let's just do the whole thing. And if people don't like it, as my dad or mom used to say, fuck them. Pardon my French, but I mean,
No. Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, anyway, that's probably the best answer
Yeah.
I can.
No, I know. I love that because you're right about the sort of the middle age, the part of it. I resonated with so much of that, but there is this sort of middle age thing where you kind of come up against, maybe things don't go sort of the way that you want them exactly, and truth be told, they don't go that way for anybody. But does become this thing where it's sort of like, at some point, and maybe it's a different point for everybody, it's too late to start over with a different game. Like you're not gonna go back and be like, well, you know what? I guess maybe I'll like, I don't know. I'm gonna become an accountant now or something. Like I guess you could, but you don't. you get a lot of time in your younger years to kind of try things out and push boundaries here and there, and maybe I'll do this for a while and I don't like it and I'll try it. But at some point it's like, no, this is actually who I am, and this is, and you're right, like either you just go for that or you don't, but you're not gonna switch gears and become some totally different kind of man.
Right.
It's probably not gonna happen. Yeah, that's very interesting. Um, yeah. Oh, it's a lot of thinking about that lately. This is like middle-aged dude writers talking. Like, you do kind of have to. You almost have to double down in a way. It's like either throw your hands up or double down. It's kind of the two options, I feel like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I would encourage anybody, because I think the fear there, and I don't want to speak for anyone, but I'll just admit my own, is like, you're kind of testing against the world to say like, well, am I enough? And that's, this classic sort
Hmm.
of psychological question that people are really, it can be debilitating. Like, am I enough? And it's
Yeah.
like, well, you're never going to fucking know, dude, unless you just do the thing. And here's the thing is, all the spiritual traditions, which probably better than I do, they're going to ask this of you in another way. And it's just called faith. And you're
Hmm.
going to have to
Yep.
basically, and back to David Milch, that's what he's actually saying. And in some way, that's probably what David Mamet is saying. There's like well, it, you have to sort of walk this thing. And the beauty of it isn't like we're going to war here. I mean, we have edits, we
Right.
have, we have
Right.
buddies that we can put our work to and say, am I crazy or is this pretty okay? But,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
yeah. I bet that thing you say about being enough is really interesting. I mean, I spent a bunch of time trying to figure out David Foster Wallace for the other podcast I did for Art of Darkness. Did this biographical kind of deep dive on him, and when he boils it all down, I
yeah,
think what ended up happening, why he met the end of a rope, is because he didn't feel like it was enough,
yep,
or he
absolutely
was enough.
right.
And dude, it's pretty hard to be more successful than that guy in the sort of never selling out camp.
Right.
Never like, and he was like a true Gen Xer in that regard. Like he just did the thing he wanted to do, and he was unbelievably successful. So if that guy doesn't feel like he's enough or it's enough, like you're gonna have, as guys like you and I, we're gonna have to figure out some way to convince ourselves we're enough or become, whatever that is. That is a sort of dragon that's out there lurking. That feeling that
Wow.
will
Yeah.
bite your head off, if you let it, for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a good
yeah,
way to put it.
yeah, Ooh,
By the way, that's a
yeah.
dragon. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Um, So, talking a little bit more specifically about the book, you mentioned David Milch and his sort of LSD experience. Now, experiences. Now, this book, Crowbar, you're pulling in a certain way. This book is a sort of zoo of conspiracy theory stuff. There's so many touch points that people who, like me, are kind of noited are they're gonna know MK Ultra is in here. There's figures like Robert Maxwell are in here. Stanford Research Institute is in here. S4 is in here. All kinds of these things kind of come up. The involvement, like the CIA's involvement in potential involvement in sort of in the music industry, is there. So much of this stuff kind of comes up. But one of the things that's reasonably prominent in the book is LSD.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, I don't want you to necessarily, I don't like, I'm not trying to put you into the corner with Crowbar and being like, how much of this do you think is actually real? But what do you think? I think about this a lot. What the hell was LSD, or what is it? Like, what happened with all of that?
Man,
I know it's a
great
very
question.
open question,
Yeah.
but what, I mean, and because here's the thing, and I'll kind of set it up a little bit where I'm sort of thinking the question. It's like, on the one hand, a lot of people who I think have done amazing work artistically, creatively and spiritually swore by LSD,
Yeah.
and also the government was using it as mind control.
Yeah.
So like, what the hell is LSD then?
Dude, it's a great question, and it goes almost to kind of the heart of the tension, I think, that I was, um that's going on in Crowbar. that I was playing with, and I've been playing with this, ever since I tried LSD, many, 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 many years ago. And I, so I mean, the audience probably knows this, but it's just like you said. It seems as if this was developed as a weapon, and it may have, and they used it in that way. I mean, you could weaponize, anything. You could weaponize cantaloupe if you want, but it didn't work out that way, it would seem. And I think when I was coming of age and when you were probably coming of age, I think the basic narrative was like it got out of hand, and the government or whatever wanted to sort of pull this back in. But now the narrative has sort of shifted where there's, I don't know, many voices at least, who will say no, it was sort of seeded into the population to sort of disrupt traditional norms or what have you. And you're like, well, that's interesting, because I mean, what is the traditional norm that it's disrupting? And here's my opinion, is that I think it's a gift from God, just like the other psychedelics. I think iron is a gift from God, and I can take iron and
Mm,
I can go on a stabbing spree. And I'm not trying to do the like,
mm,
well, and I can reduce this. I have thought, I mean, I think about this sort of stuff, till the day I die, because it goes to
mm,
there's something about, people who've taken these substances know that if there's anything like below the hallucinogenic experience, like we're not ready for it. It's like hallucinogens are literally moving you into this place where everything's destabilized, and you need to kind of, you can do whatever you want. But for me, it was always like, dude, cut the control idea and take the ride, because you're not in charge. And whenever I did that, I was
yeah,
always fine. And I'm still pretty much fine in life when I do that. Whereas when I try and do no, I can. So what I'm trying to say is, if I can wrap this up, just is to say that I think that we have this idea with conspiracies, and just as humans in general, that we must be able to label this thing and we should know it all. And I don't, even with something like Satan, like the very embodiment or kind of symbol of evil. Well, it's still, in my opinion, contained within the totality of God. And so I guess that some people, is my microphone acting funny? Sorry. I think
no, you
it's
sound okay. You sound okay.
okay. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where I fall on it. I don't know that like, it's the timing on it is all odd too. How did it, to think that it was a conspiracy, that it was made in Switzerland and then comes over, and it finds its, we deal, another guy in Crowbar is Al Hubbard.
Mm,
And this is a strange figure in the history of LSD, because he seems to be kind of a con man. And you know, as a young person, he's a con man. He's around for the first UFO stuff. He does have some association with sort of intelligence figures, but he also has a lot of seemingly very genuine feelings about hallucinogens and the therapeutic aspect. And so Al Hubbard, in Crowbar, I sort of place him as a foil to another guy who we can talk to about if you want, Father Seraphim Rose. And I don't
mm,
think this goes into maybe the meta aspect of all of this is um, these people function in real life as part of the grand narrative of history, and then we look back at them, but we have to present, like, we go ahead and just make our judgments, but we don't really know their intentions and motivations. We only know what we know. And so if
right.
we denigrate and demonize Al Hubbard or whatever, or Father Seraphim Rose or anybody, it's really kind of stupid, you know? And
Mm,
like,
mm.
I don't know what Al Hubbard went through. I don't know the whole history of LSD. And I think there's an aspect um, of this that might. sorry, it must be intentional in some
Yeah.
way, like by
Yeah.
God's. That's what I sort of think.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think there's something really, what you're saying kind of vibes with the way that I think about this. You know, I think it's probably a mistake to my purposes, based on the experiences that I've had and that I know other people have had, and the influence on culture. It's kind of weird to. I think it's a mistake to suggest that something as culturally significant as, say, LSD or the atom. I mean, I think of the
I
20th
know.
century, the three biggest, the four biggest inventions of the 20th century being the car, the atom bomb, LSD, and the internet. Right? Like,
Yeah.
um, and I think to assign like a univocal interpretation of any one of those things as to what the intention was behind it
Yeah.
is really doing like a poor job of thinking historically in a way, right? It's like um, that any one of those things, the people associated with its distribution and spread, they can have 100 different intentions. 90 of those people might be, completely well intentioned and want nothing but the best for everybody. And then you might have a couple sinister people in there that think they can take advantage of it for some reason. You might
Yeah.
have some other people who think they're well intentioned, but really, if you boil things down, they're operating from some kind of, psychopathy or whatever.
Yeah.
It gets really, really complicated. Yeah. I mean, there are figures like Andrea Puharich gets mentioned in your book, sort of briefly. He's not one of these guys that sort of takes up space on the page, but I did I looked into Andrea Puharich quite a bit for another episode that I did behind the paywall, the Shadow Ticket episode. And on the one hand, if you look at it the one way, you could be like, no, this guy was completely a psyop who was basically trying to use psychic powers and drugs to figure out ways to like control people's minds slash whatever. But then there's another way of looking at his life where it was like, no, he was just interested in this stuff and also happened to be in a position to sort of take it in a certain direction. And it's hard to parse out. And you probably, if he were alive and you sat down and talked to him, by the time you got up, you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. I can see why a person would do that. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's tricky. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's a beautiful way to look at it. Is like if we sit down with, I'm sure there's pure evil. Like I'm sure there's other people too. We could run
Sure.
in and be like, man, that guy's bad shit. Stay away from that dude. But
Right.
like history does.
You've got a couple of those in your book. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Michael Aquino seems to be evil to me, right?
He strikes me as pretty weird.
Oh,
Yeah. Like not a guy I really want
yeah.
to spend a lot of time with.
Right. Now, you mentioned, and I did want to ask about this. Tell me about Father Seraphim Rose.
Sure.
He's not he's in the book. He's not a character in the book, but his work and his influence is very significant to the plot of Crowbar. And I think maybe people who haven't read it yet, you kind of talking about him a little bit, maybe that'll actually help them. I think it might even add to their reading experience.
Yeah. So Father Seraphim Rose is this very interesting character. He was Eugene Rose before he became a monk. And he was a guy who was actually just running around in that same like Bay Area 60s, 70s milieu of hippies and the Grateful Dead and all of this stuff. And he was a Buddhist scholar for a while, and he seems to have been a genuine seeker, somebody who, a lot of the hippies of that era, I don't blame them. I honestly don't. Like, they just wanted to get laid and have fun, and there's nothing. I mean, maybe there's something wrong with that. Who knows? But I mean, I just kind of don't condemn those people. But it's worth noting that I think that Father Seraphim Rose was like a different kind of dude. Like he was destined for a total submission to the pilgrimage towards God. And he went on and became like a super important figure for American Orthodoxy. People may not know this. I didn't know it, before I got into Orthodoxy, that And people, I didn't even know, to tell you the truth, this is pretty shameful, but like I didn't even understand what the schism was, until fairly late in my life. But there was originally one church, and this sort of split at a certain point. And then even the dates are confusing. Let's say like 700 AD to 1000, like somewhere in there it happens. And then you have Catholicism. And so this is sort of the first split in Christianity. And what Orthodoxy sort of, well, I won't go there. That would be too dangerous. I can see myself going into a 35-minute thing there. So let me pull back just one second. It's just odd that anybody would kind of have wound up in Orthodoxy in the 70s, whereas now it's a little bit more well known in America. Let's just say that. And it's even more kind of remarkable that he doesn't even join the church to become a priest. He just goes right into being a monk, and he writes a series of books that become really important for Orthodox people now, in our time that we're living. And he has one particular book called, I think it's called Orthodoxy and the New Religion. So in this book in the 70s, he's talking about a sort of coming Antichrist psyop that's going to involve UFOs, hallucinogens, rock and roll, and all sorts of other things. And my question, you see where I'm going with this, is like, well, okay, so for people now reading this, they're like, well, damn, this guy was right about all this stuff. But it's kind of over, and he might be. I'm not saying he's not. I'm really not taking any position on this. But it's kind of overlooked as it's evaluated. Like, he was in this milieu for quite some time, and he was not like innocent or of it. I mean, he was partaking in all of the carnal pleasures and all of these things. And so he may have been exposed to certain ideas that were just more obvious to him, that like the internet would happen, for example, that LSD was going to change sort of culture, which, I mean, I think that you could have I think there were a lot of guys, like you've studied this period of time where I think there were a number of people that like Leary were like, I've taken acid. This thing is a game changer, and eventually it's going to be really common and everyone is going to take it. Well, like you can get magic mushrooms here in Oregon and take them and it's no big deal. Like
Right,
they were here.
Right.
Just to finish up on Father Seraphim Rose, like, I want to do him some amount of justice. For anybody that's interested, his books are really good. They're really interesting. He doesn't always harp on he only has one book about the conspiracy stuff. And he's a very interesting guy. His history is worth, taking note of, because we don't have very many like American. He's not a saint yet. He hasn't been canonized just yet, but it seems to be a presumption in the church that he will. And Orthodoxy is infamous or famous for just moving at a snail's pace. Like they'll stretch this out for 100 years if they need to, and then they'll canonize.
Yeah, they're in no rush. Yeah, they're in no rush, which
Right.
I appreciate. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it needs to move. It's good that it moves slow. No, he's. I had sort of heard the name a couple times before I read Crowbar, but I had no familiarity, and I kind of went down a sort of Wikipedia level rabbit hole, and actually bought Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, I think it is. I haven't gotten around to reading it yet, but it just sounds like a fascinating guy, because he is one of these sort of. There are a number of people that, to me, if you can kind of understand their life and their outlook and their work, you kind of start to understand what the hell the 20th century was, right? And I hadn't been familiar with him, but he does seem like a guy, like if you really can figure out where he sits, I think a lot of other stuff can start to make sense to a certain degree. So, Father Seraphim Rose, very interesting. Yeah.
I think. Go ahead.
Oh, well, the next question I had, and this is sort of tangentially related, and because Crowbar is set in the 80s, and you have a number of characters who are real people. Like I said, like we said, Father Seraphim Rose isn't really on the page, but there are other people, real people, who are on the page, including Jerry Garcia, Robert Maxwell. There's a bunch of others. I'm sort of blanking on. The D'Angelo character is a real guy. He's sort of involved in kind of a program to kill type CIA asset. And a number of other people in the book are real people, and of course you take some degree of liberties with what they do and what they get up to, and that's all cool. I'm curious, and for people who are fans of James Ellroy, it feels like this is in the James Ellroy school of dealing with history, and I say that as a total fan of James Ellroy, so I love that. But I kind of got curious, like, and as somebody who also myself, I'm writing something that's set in the 30s where there are a handful of real people are going to be characters. And I
Yeah.
got curious thinking, wondering what your thoughts were on this. What is the novelist, maybe this isn't the right word, but I'm going to use it anyway. What is the novelist owe to history?
Damn,
Like,
good question, man.
how, like, yeah, like you can do anything you want. And I would never say anybody, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. But like, you're thinking about this, like, is there a sense of doing something justice? Is there a sense of I need to try to explain something? Do I need to fill in a gap?
Yeah.
Maybe this is too open ended as a question, but
Well, I do have an opinion on it. It's a great question, I think, actually. And you're right. I mean, I come down with Elroy. Like, I think that Elroy, my take on it is he's doing like Elroy's version of history. And to the extent that James Elroy is probably very conscientious and meticulous, and at this point in life he has a lot of free time. I don't think he has kids. I think he's hell bent on making his, like, the great American novel. Sorry, that's my dog shaking.
no, it's all right.
So, but he doesn't do the thing of like, well, some people have this. He's just locking into a version, and I also think that I take from him that he isn't like dogmatic about this is actually what happened. I think he's just throwing it out as like, look, you're going to read the book. It's going to be entertaining. All of us are going to die and we're not going to know what the hell just happened. So let's just
Right.
and I don't think it's really more than that. So the flip side for me too is when you read these historical novels where some of them are, you just have to stand there like, or I do anyway. I'm like, man, I don't know how many books this person must have read, like how many decades they put into this study of, well, I mean, for us, right? All of us are like McCarthy acolytes in a way,
Yeah.
and then the lore around Blood Meridian was that, oh, I mean, I remember when I first heard about Blood Meridian, the tale going around was like Cormac had gone to Mexico, ridden the entire course that the Glanton gang takes on horseback, using
Right.
like similar, like the same sort of gear and whatnot. And that turns out to be utter horseshit. That none of that ever
Of
happened.
course. Of
So I was
course.
like, well, let's and that's kind of, to go back to your original question. I don't think we owe anything. I think we owe ourselves, our families, our conception of God, and we just try and do our best. Because when I look out
Yeah.
the window, what I think of history, my opinion is that we don't know anything, dude. Like psyops and um accidents, intentional, non-intentional, mistranslation. And dude, this has been adding up and just piling on each other. And so when people get all crazy about this really happened, I just walk away and I'm like, you don't, the like, I feel bad for them. Like,
Yeah.
bro, you got to get
Yeah.
around to that point where it's like, whatever happened happened, and that's that, and we're not going to know. That's how I feel about
Yeah.
it.
I'm with you there. I think there is a certain way. I mean, to be sort of English majory about it for a second, there is a way to sort of what Elroy's doing, what you're doing. There's this like, it 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 sort of negates the idea that you can have a coherent history. It's like, the JFK assassination is, we're never going to know what happened. Nobody is. Whoever does, there maybe it was 3 people who actually know. They're all dead. We're never going to know what happened. And every historical event is sort of is a similar sort of thing. And I may have already like said this on the podcast one time, but are you familiar with the what they call the Gelman delusion? I think it's called.
Yeah, but
Murray Gelman, the
amnesia,
physicist.
Gelman amnesia,
Yeah,
or something.
amnesia. Yeah. Gelman amnesia, which is just like, you take any newsworthy event that you actually, you quote unquote know what happened, and then
Yeah,
or your field, your discipline, and then look how it's sort of covered in text or in TV, a news report or something, and realize that the delta between what you know and what is being reported, that same gap shows up in everything else.
yeah,
So yeah, so it's all just sort of like half truths sort of folded on top of each other. So if you were going to have a sort of religious fidelity to history in your writing, you're just to have a religious fidelity to a distorted version of what happened anyway, I think.
and I think I would go a step further even to say you're almost probably serving some like this third thing that's also rather nebulous and probably not like entirely innocent, which is the consensus. Like you're kind of
Yeah.
contributing to the NPCification of the universe or humanity. And that's why when I wrote Crowbar, I was
Yeah.
like, you know what? This is kind of a weapon. I'm just going to drop this in the middle and it's
Yeah.
going to explode and I'm going to walk out. And that's what I wanted to do.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Well, it does. It does it. It
Thank
definitely does. It definitely is prying something open for sure. Uh,
Awesome.
there are a few other sort of questions I wanted to ask you because I think I'm going to be interested in your answers. One of them, 1982, in some ways seems like a curious place or time to set the thing. And maybe your life, I know we're roughly the same age. I think you might be a little bit older than me, but
Yeah.
I grew up with this conception that the 80s were kind of corny and fake, sort of. That's not my
Yeah.
perspective on it now, but like the 80s was lame until eventually we sort of ironically started having 80s parties, and then I don't know, some kind of reevaluation process began. But my perspective on it now is that the 80s is actually super interesting. And in fact, I actually just recently, when I was thinking about this conversation, I looked back at the books that I covered in depth on this show so far. And like out of the 12 I've gone deep on, I think 6 of them were written in the 80s through no
Really?
strategy at all. They just were. They just were. Yeah, I think that's right. Um, and anyway, I'm curious, why did you? I guess first, and maybe it's all one question. Why did you set it in the 80s? And what the hell was the 80s?
Yeah. Great question. I think the same. We're about the same age, and I'm probably a little bit older. I would have been about, well, I mean, like 6 or 7 or something in 1982, um,
Okay.
which is kind of the age where you start. People say, like my oldest boy is 5, and so I think a lot about, well, is he going to really remember these things? And I think he's just about getting to the point where he'll have, like when he's 50, he'll have snippets of this. But at about
Mm-hmm.
7 or 8 or so, that's probably contributing to that, my personal choice. But the 80s, I agree. I had a similar thing, exactly the same. I mean, that's what seems to have happened. It was sort of dorky. Like, no, the 90s are pretty cool, but the 70s were really cool. But then the 80s,
Right.
like I don't know, like the man cramp. So there are these geopolitical and political happenings that went down. You know, we're all familiar with them, and I'm not a great historian, but it doesn't. It almost, to me, the best I've been able to come up with is like the financialization of our lives and everything, which is kind of finding its peak right now. I just saw this thing on X today, this poly market sort of thing where these wannabe billionaires are saying, yeah, what we need to do is like, you just saw this too, right? Like we're gonna make it
Yeah,
so you
it-
bet on people's opinions. And I was like, man, you guys have walked into my trap so perfectly. It's almost disturbing me as the guy who wrote this book, basically to reflect what I'm seeing as really stupid and evil. But
right.
I do think, Brad, like there's my dad, this is kind of pertinent, he was a financial guy. He had an MBA and he was an accountant and those sorts of things. And he was, he had two kids at that point, and so there was a number of um, crashes around this time. And he's a normal guy, like he
Mhm.
wasn't, on Wall Street or anything, but he's super competent. And so I think that again, personally, there was kind of, if you look at the arc of your life, there was a blip for my my family and my father at that time. And I think that in retrospect, what he was experiencing and having to manage as a responsible person was the stuff that went down in terms of the conspiracy theories, JFK and whatnot. You know, I do think that many of our conspiracy theories are true. I think there's some truth to most of them. There's a few that are absurd, but
Mhm.
I I don't ascribe like the agency to. I think there are groups of people too that are like, they are basically cabals, but I don't think that they're all powerful. And this is the distinction most people make. Like, oh, you really think the government could pull this off? No, actually, I don't. But I think that if you had a certain group of people with a ton of money and agency, and they had all the time in the world to sort of read the trends, and they're kind of psychopathic anyway. If I postulate an agentic sort of evil, a true supernatural evil behind that, all of a sudden they don't need to be in charge. They're going to get help. This is Stephen King and a million other guys
Right.
that have kind of said, all you need to do is sort of act your role, and the devil or whatever will sort of, I don't view it as the devil personally, but let's just use him for a second. He'll arrange the rest of it. And I do believe that
Right.
this financialization of ourselves is, I'm gonna be passionate with this, is purely fucking evil. And I don't think that we need to sit around and debate like, well, is Father Seraphim Rose right? Can I not do LSD? Am I going to go to hell? I don't give a shit.
Right.
What's really obvious and we can all agree on is like, I think that, the financialization of everything, and this massive disparity in just living standard and wealth, we've never dealt with that, and we just can't. We're just
Right.
running around now with our heads chopped off. So I think something like that, maybe the seed of it happened in the 80s, and that is
In the
reflected in
80s.
the Neon and the Miami Vice, and the it's also reflected, though, I tried to do this in the book. There's an incredible amount of great shit that came out in the 80s. Music wise, movies
Yeah.
are fantastic. A ton of great novels hit the shelves. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting
Yeah.
time.
For sure. I mean, and what is more of a coked up idea than we're gonna financialize people's like m- opinions and mind? That is the most coked up idea I've ever heard, to be
It's
honest. It's like,
right. It,
and yeah, and I saw that probably the same little bit that you did, and they're like, "How are you gonna unlock this $1 trillion financial market?" And it's like, that's not a market. A market is where like you make a thing and you bring
yeah.
it and you find a person who wants it and they buy it. Like this is not like an anti-capitalist thing by any means. It's just what you're
No.
talking about. It's not a market. It's like it's something else entirely. You're turning things that are not supposed to be quantifiable into quantity, and it's I don't think it's. I think I'm with you. I think that kind of stuff's evil. And where does it start to be? Is crypto evil? I don't know, but like that thing that I saw, this sort of Kalshi thing. And then the woman, one of the co-founders, is sort of being propped up and celebrated as like the youngest self-made woman billionaire. And it's
I know.
like, I mean, I guess good for her or something, but like how we're supposed to think this person's like heroic in some way?
I
Like,
know that that's
it's bizarre.
but that's isn't that exactly what they're pitching it as, is like, she made a shit ton of money, so she's good. It's like,
Right.
damn, man. Like
Right.
like
No,
no.
no, she's not.
No, she's not.
the the youngest female billionaire before her was that woman who started Theranos, which was basically just a con game. So,
Yeah.
it's weird. It's kind of weird the people that we're choosing to celebrate. Well, but it's interesting too because there's something going. I think you're really onto something with sort of what was spawned or began to sort of flower in the 80s. But there's an interesting sort of generational thing because the 90s comes along, and at least in American culture, 90s is sort of the domain of the Gen X, which is in a way, I'm not saying it was successful, but it is in a way a pushback and a reaction to a lot of these things that I think were happening in the 80s, right? The sort of grunge movement and the sort of the Gen X like hatred for selling out, which I think is an ethic that needs to come back to a certain degree. But I feel like now we've sort of circled back around, and we're just as materialistic culturally as we ever might have been in the 80s. It seems like to a kind of gross degree, really. Like and I find myself falling for it too, because there's this algorithmic representation of it. Like I found myself watching a YouTube video a short the other day of a dude just like doing one of these car wraps around some McLaren supercar. And it was hitting me on that very basic sensory tactile satisfaction thing, watching him smooth out the bubbles, like just that sort of, it's the same as like popping bubble wrap. It just kind of feels nice. But then I was like, I'm being presented this McLaren as though it's like something I would want. Like, what? Why? What is this? If I had that money, if I could afford it, I still wouldn't buy it. Like, there's, yeah. And anyway, so I think maybe there is this weird, like, there's almost like we're in some kind of mirror image of the 80s somehow now. I don't know. I mean, I think that would probably require a deeper analysis than we've sort of got the time or space for, but it's interesting. And I was really kind of stoked to see you said it in the 80s, because it does feel from a sort of like cultural commentary standpoint, it almost feels like a forgotten decade in a way. It's like the 70s is like you said, the 70s was cool, the 90s was kind of cool, and the 80s is almost, it feels like a little bit of like an undiscovered country or a blind spot that we all have. And I think that's one of the many cool things that Crowbar is doing, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have tons of questions. I have one of the things that you do in this book, and I'll probably include a little reading from this kind of passage or part of the book that I'm talking about. And I don't think this spoils anything, but one of the things that you do in this book is you have sort of side quests in a way, and what I mean by that is, like, we're gonna deal with a character now whose role in the novel isn't strictly to force the plot along, though what they say and do has implications for the plot. But it's almost like what this person's, speaking from a sort of functional utilitarian standpoint, the sort of function of this character is in part to provide us some kind of like philosophical exposition about what we're experiencing as readers. And one of my favorite ones of these sort of directions that we go is when Satya, and I realized how much I liked this on the second read that I did in the last week here. Satya goes to Boeing, and maybe you know what I realized? I just read the same copy of the book twice, so maybe you took this part out. Now that you mentioned you took parts out, I hope that's not the case.
No, it's still
where
there.
Satya goes to see Rod at Boeing.
Yeah.
That's still in there. Okay, good.
Yeah.
A mirror, a reflection, a prism, shard, and man should make war one-on-one. That's fine. Maybe it's even ideal. Raise men up, honing constantly toward a particular contest. Such as what? Two men in a natural setting, no outsiders, no specialized tools, a single blade, maybe some cordage. Okay, this is a good place to help you see. Here we are at Boeing, the central nervous system of American war making, the hypothalamus, in fact, billions of dollars, everyone conscientious, very smart, but they get dumber every day. Over years, even the years I've been coming here to dump these thoughts for a paycheck, I've seen them become actively retarded. Not fully retarded as in chromosomally divergent, but their edge, such as it were, has been so dulled. It's dulled because it's a rigged game. It's a rigged game for those pitiful souls who eventually receive the business end of the missilery, sure, but it's a rigged game for the missile maker, and he doesn't even know. Among the questions they have here is one asking about alternate dimensions, Satya said. Rod laughed. The framing is itself a form of suicide or genocide, perhaps. You have to laugh, I suppose. You seem like a nice person, Satya, so we're already in a, quote, alternative dimension. Read Gödel. Leibniz. There's a fellow in the early church called Maximus the Confessor. That's as close as we're going to get, and he goes right to the crux of the problem without the contortions and histrionics, without demanding sacrifice. War. The trick was that we, Western civilization, what have you, we traded the reality of a spiritual dimension for faith and measurement. What Gödel or Maximus is pointing us towards is the realization that this is all, everything, contained. The terror recently introduced is a simulation of that container which was fencing, scaffolding for our feeble attempts at development beyond the cycle of fecundity. The cycle of fecundity. Sounds menstrual, she laughed. Or minstrel. Read Clement. Okay. The point regarding all of this is that it's already present and, as they say, walking among us. The independent intelligence we imagine we're to create already took over quite some centuries ago. We're living not with a demiurge, but with a form of Munchausen by proxy, parasitic, ultra-deceptive because it is us taking life through our creations of machinery, philosophy, art. Every market is one market. The market is the parasite. My son used to ask of every animal he learned, Dad, what it eats? That's how he'd frame at age 2. That's the primary question to ask when encountering something new. A 2-year-old knows to ask. Does this entity have within its purview either interest in or capacity to eat me? I've had this notion that I've been thinking about for a while, and I'm working on this this Madness episode that will be coming out soon about Philip K. Dick's Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, kind of diving into the Gnosticism stuff. And Gnosticism almost feels like a tired concept in a way, but what Rod is expressing is at least tangentially this sort of Gnostic perspective on things, right? He's and what I sort of, I guess, mean by that more strictly is he's implying that there's a real world or a different alternate world out there, and there's one that sort of we're in here, and possibly there's a way of moving in between the two. And I guess I was kind of curious, and this sort of goes to, we mentioned Cormac McCarthy. He's sort of, we kind of all understand, all the closer years of him now understand that now he is, at least in his writing, has sort of Gnostic tendencies. Is this sort of notion of Gnosticism, especially this, alternate, there's different worlds, there's different interpretive layers to place on the worlds. Is this a thing that all writers are attracted to? In some way, like, are we all as writers kind of like at least slightly Gnostic, even if we don't necessarily overtly subscribe to that? What do you think of that?
Well, I think a lot about that. I think a lot about this. It's preoccupied me for quite a while. One thing about Gnosticism that I learned actually while I was researching and writing Crowbar was that now, back to Orthodoxy, for example, they're very anti-Gnostic. This cannot be the conception of things. Like, it can't be, as you said, that there's this other place and maybe there's a margin between them and things might happen in this margin between these. That was not the way that Christianity actually developed way, way back at the beginning. And I'm not a Christian scholar. I'm not going to debate this. I wrote the novel, deal with that. But what I picked up from, you know what I mean? Like, my thing is there. I think that there's a lot to be. I've gained a lot from reframing it with this panentheistic idea, where we kind of alluded to it earlier, where because people's idea of spirituality or God or these things is very bizarre and fragmented already. But to me, anyway, it makes sense that if you have a God, then, because something does not come from nothing, and I won't go I won't do a whole religious um, explication here. I'll get back to the question, but that says to me, that just precludes for me a lot of declarations about how things must be. It's just like, well, no, no, no. If we're all within God, then us using things like logic or what have you to determine or experience or revelation, we may have like all of these at our disposal, but it still doesn't mean that we know what's going on. I mean, you could have some sort of Gnostic like world and anything could be happening. Maybe God cordoned it off and didn't manage to, sneak that part in the Bible, or hasn't managed to reveal it to a prophet yet. I don't know. Or, no one's dropped LSD and had it occur to them yet. But
Right.
I wonder as well, because I don't really think that, right, there's this meta aspect, going also back to this idea of like you as the writer, the Mametian idea of, if you go on the same journey as your characters. So I will admit, like, this, I play with this and I insert it, and I'm not, maybe the difference between some of my work and others is I'm ultimately not making a declaration. I'm just going through the process myself. So that's part of why I think Crowbar reads the way it does, is I'm not saying, like the academics, oh yes, I'm playing with this meta idea. Like, well, yeah, I'm playing with it, but I don't know what that actually means. I'm just exploring it
Right.
as a means to sort of better myself and maybe contribute to the universe. And also, another thing David Milch said that he really came down on was like, and I've said this before, writing is a way of, like, for people such as myself or maybe yourself, into the world actually. So it may be that we're just sort of constructed this way where we have all these different potentialities that we can envision, and and that may actually back, if everyone else is in sort of a box, a consensus box, it's hard to reach the world, and it's very off-putting to me. So if I can frame the world with more potential, perhaps it's easier for me to just simply choke some of it down. I don't know that I believe
Right.
these psychological sorts of explanations. I think maybe it's closer to, this is a spiritual practice and it is a legitimate way of uh, you know approaching, let's say, if not deriving truth. And so in its legitimacy, I don't want to again make any sort of declaration other than that's how it is for me, and that's how it is for you, and that's how it is for McCarthy. um if I go to, I'll shut up after this, but I mean, his last
No,
book,
this is great.
which I think a lot of people were disappointed with it. I think a lot of people misunderstood it. um his last line, right, is really the last thing that he almost leaves us with. Like the bard sort of, he comes down on this idea that he's gonna sit on this pallet and he'll be like the last pagan, and he'll be singing as he goes. um
Mm,
I mean, a guy like McCarthy who could work on a book for 40 years, that's not by accident. That's not, there's nothing about that that's, unaccounted for. I think that maybe what he is suggesting is not that, oh, don't be Christian or do be Gnostic or do be Orthodox. He may just be sort of taking some sort of, maybe justifying is the wrong word, but sort of making testimony to his experience. Like, I tried, and this is where I have to come to rest on this. And for him, I mean, and obviously in that book, like, there's many worlds in the
right.
scientific, like, quantum sense. There's many worlds in Alice's mind. There's many worlds and experiences that Bobby Western goes through, and Cormac McCarthy has built many worlds. So yeah, I think that we as a people have are missing the boat in general, and that's why Crowbar is Crowbar. I'm just saying maybe we should take the Crowbar and do some more work of lifting this thing up, maybe carefully,
Mm,
maybe not,
mm,
but and then there too with the 80s, I think the crowbar thing applies. As you said, there's some cap, there's something that happened in the 80s maybe, and
Yeah.
it's a world unto itself. I don't know. I think that's the best I could do. I couldn't really
Yeah.
really say.
No, no, I like all this. I'm glad you brought up this this recent financialization, the Kelshi thing, because I think
Yeah.
this all kind of sort of ties in to what you're saying and what we've been talking about more generally, and what Crowbar is doing as a book, because okay, so to sort of try to take off from the kind of Gnostic thing there, like whether or not there are sort of alternate realities and we're living in a reality, that's circumscribed by the demiurge or whatever, like forget about whether or not any of that's true. If everything becomes financialized and we then begin to live in this sort of like financialized bubble, right? This like controlled territory in which everything is involved in this game that's controlled ultimately by people in a very very contained way.
Yeah.
Well, the sort of Gnostic idea that we live in a world created by a crazy god is sort of at least metaphorically true in that sense, right? Because we're trapped in Kelshi world,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that doesn't have to be metaphysical at all. That's not even like I don't even think saying that is really that heretical. Even it's like no, if we create like we could make it true where we create a
Right.
hell realm for ourselves that we can't escape. And that's where I think Gnosticism gets kind of interesting, because whether or not it's metaphysically true or it was 1,000 years ago or whatever, there may be some stuff buried in there that we can use to keep ourselves out of the hell realm that we're creating for our
Brilliant.
as a species. Yeah. That's kind of how I've been thinking of it. So it's like, yeah, it's like I don't consider myself a Gnostic, but like I do sort of think we're building the Black Iron Prison around us, like a day at a time. And I'm hoping that maybe I'll get I can get somebody to put a nail file on a cake for me, so I can maybe break out of this thing at some point. Hasn't happened quite yet. I'm still on the internet checking how much Bitcoin is worth again today. I guess I got. Trying to think kind of what else we want to talk about. Maybe we'll take this in kind of a fun direction. I think we got a lot of the cool stuff that I wanted to hit and super interesting stuff. You sort of said there's a kernel of you think there's a kernel of truth to a lot of conspiracy theories, and I'm with you. I think there's something fishy going on in a lot of cases. I don't think there's a sort of an overarching totalizing thing that five guys in a smoky room are just making all the decisions for us. But I do think clearly people are acting covertly to nudge things in certain directions and all of that. But what are some? I think going down the sort of rabbit hole of sort of conspiracy internet culture, you pretty quickly come across some kind of outlandish stuff.
Yep.
What is a conspiracy theory that you've come across that you're like, that's just not the case?
Great
Are
question.
there any?
Yeah, I was thinking about this recently. So we kind of have to say, remember this guy? You may not. He was not famous or anything, but there was this dude in the Obama administration called Cass Sunstein, and he's married to this. Yeah, he had like his position was like, I don't know, White House counterintelligence, essentially, because he hatched this idea that conspiracy thinking on the internet was getting so out of hand that they probably needed to involve themselves in literally re-steering like the global narrative. Just the fact that they need to acknowledge that says. So he's married to this woman named Martha Nussbaum, who is I have read a little bit of her philosophy, and it's dismissible in my opinion, but they're very like politically motivated people. And so this is just to say that at a certain point, not only like with COINTELPRO, that was kept secret, but we live in a time where now there's an office, and probably more than an office, in our country, in this country, the United States. So you know for a fact there are replicas of this in other countries, where their job is to insert into the conspiracy sort of discussion complete and utter bullshit to sort of muddy the waters. And that alone sort of justifies whole tranches of the 70s and 80s conspiracy culture where they were saying that exact thing. These guys are getting in here and confusing all of the narrative so that it can never be unraveled. You know, you could never find a place to cut the knot. One of these, I think there are many of these. I think that there was this idea that the Twin Towers were dustified, that there was some sort of like super like Death Star weapon that's totally invisible, but it hit like an energy weapon, and it made them into dust. Well, I don't, and that was kind of legitimate at the time. Like the woman who came out with that idea and stood behind it had a PhD, and she had some backing, and she got a lot of, and then she just poof disappeared. I forget her.
She got dustified. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of these.
Just kidding. Yeah.
I think that I actually,
that's an interesting one.
I give a lot of credence to most of them, actually. Like even here, I'll just say it, like the flat earth one seemed to be one of these cases where they're like inserting completely ridiculous stuff to kind of delegitimize anybody who would counter the consensus narrative. I mean, I don't know. Like one, I don't care enough to like take the trip to Australia and time it out or whatever you need to know. But I'm also in a position where it's like, yeah, I mean, maybe it could be that the structure, but I'm at a point where I guess I kind of believe that the benefit of a lot of this thinking is that it does loosen the constraints on our conceptions of reality. And yeah, it can go too far, but this is a tension that somebody's going to manage. And so I want to manage it for myself or with people that I choose, which is all just to make this point, like the physical world around us, I am not at all convinced that it is as firm as it would seem. You know, I don't think that our experience. Yeah, I'll stop there.
I am totally with you on that. It is like, I don't really, I guess, buy into like the flat Earth thing, and I'm not gonna sit around and argue with somebody that it is the case. But I do think one thing that I've sort of learned in the 21st century is that like pretty much every idea you have about a fact is just provisional anyway. It's all just you're all kind of just operating on the assumptions that you need to get from point A to point B. None of it's really and you know, this is probably sounds, it's not even like a conspiracy theory, but something that I think is sort of going on, at least functionally. I really think that I think one of the sort of dangers of kind of AI stuff and like fake AI video and all of the things that the LLMs can generate, I think there's this weird thing where reality is actually sort of held up by what we all sort of agree on as happening.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what keeps it in place. And I think once you start introducing enough fake stuff in where none of us can agree anymore, I think on a real actual level, reality starts to decohere a little bit. Like it starts to fall apart a little bit because there used to be very little that was more reliable than seeing a video of something. Seeing somebody on video doing something was basically happened. Right? Very difficult to fake. And now all that goes out the window. And I really do think it's gonna reality on some actual level is going to kind of fall apart. And maybe it turns into, you know, several million different realities that are all don't overlap each other or something. But I don't even know if that's a conspiracy theory, but I think that's happening. and
Well,
and
here's
you know, maybe the flat Earth is an example of that, where it's like, well, what if, you know, 1 out of 10 people think the Earth is flat? That's a big break in consensus reality for sure.
it's huge. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
the bad news is that I think I believe basically a similar thing. I sort of conceive of certain forces that protect us. You know, like maybe that's what Jesus is. Maybe Jesus.
Mm,
I mean, they say he's the logos, like he's the ordering principle. I mean, he's associated with this, ancient concept. I sort of wonder sometimes:
mhm.
is that the only thing that holds this whole fever dream together? Is
It
this
could
kind
be.
of like totally benevolent understanding? Because I mean, I've had fear, in my life, and usually the if I can just kind of glimpse the absolute root of it, it's something along the lines of like total dispersal, where everything is just kind of drifting off into nothing.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's like I don't know how we would prove it, because I think that transcendental arguments would leave us right where we are. Like, well, if you and I believe that, are we then creating the belief in that the belief like a
Right.
substantial factor in reality? Well,
Right.
right back, but you, dude, it's inarguable. It's happening though, that
Hmm.
reality is sort of drifting apart. I mean, we could use metrics of any sort,
Right.
from
Right.
like nature. We've actually gone so far as to sort of dissolve like at molecular levels what used to just be a constant, as far as
Right.
water or weather. I mean, so at what point are we going to go, ah, man, maybe we should pump the brakes and kind of get a grip on this stuff? And I don't know that we will. I hope we do, but
No, I don't. I mean, I hope we do too, but I don't see things go in that direction. Not in the foreseeable future. I think we might. I think, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, I think some bad shit might have to happen. Uh, you know, not in a encouraging it kind of way, but I think there
I,
might have to be, to some degree, a kind of reckoning, unfortunately, um, which is a little scary, obviously. Um, you know, as we kind of wind down here, one thing you and I haven't really talked about, and it's a big thing. And by the way, this is the kind of thoughts that the novel Crowbar sort of starts to inspire, right? This isn't, for me anyway, the sorts of things you start thinking about, and a lot more as well. One thing that's really well handled in Crowbar is music. Um, there's a soundtrack to this book, both sort of literal, but also within the book itself. You commonly, frequently, and in a really nice, sort of delicately done way, sort of let us know what's happening musically from time to time when it seems appropriate. And I kind of got curious, and I know you are a musician, but I don't really know the scope of it. I was hoping you could maybe share with me, sort of, I mean, what do you play? What is your musical creative process like? What's that part of Andy Edwards' life like?
sure. Well, a part of my writing process is like very much yoked to the music. I play every day. I've played for decades, and I I found that in really devoting myself to getting good at my instrument, it without any other, I didn't sit down and do exercises or anything. It translated over into other things, like writing. And I also found that in writing song lyrics, like really making an effort at writing a great song, like something that you could stand up next to a great Bob Dylan song, or a great, who pick your player, to really make an effort at that. But not necessarily, shine a spotlight on it or try and immediately make money from it. It worked that compression thing that we spoke of earlier, as far as, if you only have a few lines to convey something, yeah, you have the music, you have um, access to all sorts of sonic equipment, but if you just have the lines, it forces you to think in these other ways. And so if I have a secret that I could share, or that, you can, it's not easy, and it's like double the work, but I have found that that really makes a big difference. And
Wow.
so for me, music is like, uh, you know, Carlos Castaneda. It probably, you guys did a, back at Art of Darkness, you did a couple fantastic episodes on him,
Yeah.
and who I would recommend to everybody. I have, but he had this idea that he probably stole from somebody, of the act of power, where it's just a thing that you don't necessarily need to share with everybody all the time, but it's something, to me, I took away, it's a pure thing. And so for me, that's what music is. Eventually, I'll probably uh, share it with the world in some capacity.
Mm.
But for the longest time, I mean, decades now, it's been that thing, that Gen X thing, where it's where you were alluding to this earlier, where we in the 90s had this sense that everyone had sold out, and then Cobain blew his brains out, and it seemed, people took this as a sort of sign, like you couldn't do anything. I never really bought into any of that. But I do believe I bought fully into the idea that there's a thing called selling out, and it does have to do with your soul, and you have to take responsibility for it, and in some way. So for me, so far, what it's been is just to basically continue to nurture it and get as good as I possibly can, for the sheer absolute, love of the game. So in point of fact, like, music is more important to me, and I put more effort into it, and I am a much better musician than I am a writer. So I just have not
Oh,
decided
damn.
that. Yeah, yeah. I
That's
just have
oh
never.
man. Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, that's all. That's no, that's awesome. I was just saying, if you're a better musician than you are a writer, then there are some gems out there. But there's some gems sort of waiting for us, the audience. But I do
Yeah.
love this. I do love the purity of that devotion, of like,
Thanks.
of it's not about sharing it necessarily. It's not about maybe not sharing it either. But there's a different motivation imbued in it, and
Yeah.
it sounds kind of sacred in a way, to have something like that in your life,
It,
in a real way. So that's yeah.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly the word. It's sacred, and it's like a religious level thing for me. And it kind of touches on, you know, you had an idea not too long ago. I think you were public about it, where you were like, maybe I'll just write and just preserve it for myself. And dude,
Yeah.
there's when you think about it as an option, to me anyway, it changes that whole dynamic of the financialization of your soul in a way
Mhm.
that's, I don't think that you have to like keep it to yourself, but it reframes it in such a way that I think you can. I remember, as the hippies and stuff used to say, like, you can re-empower yourself or whatever. Well, I think you probably actually
Right.
can in some way.
Yeah, yeah. No, I that idea is still intoxicating to me. Just that, what if you just did it? What if what if you did, you did it and you never even tried to get anybody to pay attention to it? I'm not going to go that route probably, but I could see I guess in that context, I could see myself over the next decades that I'm writing a novel that I have no intention of putting out. It's
Right.
just like its own thing, right? Hopefully I have a bunch of other books that do go out to the world and people love them. But maybe I do have this one that's just mine. It's just for me, not just for me, but just as a pure articulation of this thing that I think I'm doing and engaging with. And the fact that you've got that at the moment for music is cool, and that gives me a lot to think about. I love it. Well, I think this is a great spot to end it. Andy, once
Yeah.
again, thank you so much for joining me. You and I have had a few conversations now, and I always get a lot out of it. I love talking to you. People, go get Crowbar. I'm serious. This is I didn't read all the books that came out in 2025, I'm going to be honest, but I think this is almost certainly the best one that came out. So go get it. You will not regret it. Yeah. Andy, anything else you need
No, I
to
just
say or plug or do it?
no. Other than to say thank you. I really enjoy talking to you too, and I'm so grateful that you read the book early and had me back. I hope that we can do it again. That's all I really have to say.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
but go buy Crowbar
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Go buy Crowbar, absolutely. And we are. Andy is coming back in January. We're going to talk about Cormac McCarthy's The Crossing, which is at the sleeper Cormac McCarthy masterpiece. I'm most of the way through it right now, and I think it might be. So I can't wait to have that conversation with you as well.
Me too.
So, all right. Yeah, that's it. Bye, everybody.
Have you ever heard about Willie the Weeper? Had a job as a chimney sweeper. He had the dope habit and he had his bad. Listen while I tell you about a dream he had. Oh, he went down to the dope shop one Saturday night. He knew the lights would all be burning bright. Well, I guess he smoked a dozen pills or more. When he woke up, he was on a foreign shore. The Queen of Sheba was the first he met. She called him lovey-dovey and honey pet. She gave him a great big automobile with a diamond headlight and a golden wheel. Down in Honolulu, Willie fell in a trance, seeing the dusky beauties do the hula dance. His sweetie got in jail and Willie sure did shout when he got the news that she had wiggled out. He landed with a splash in the river Nile, riding on a sea-going crocodile. He winked at Cleopatra, she said, ain't he a sight? He said, how about a date for next Saturday night? He had 1,000,000 cattle and he had 1,000,000 sheep, had 1,000,000 vessels on the ocean deep, had $1,000,000 all in nickels and dimes. Well, he knew because he counted it 1,000 times. He landed in New York one evening late. He asked his sugar for an after date, started to kiss her and she started to pout when bang, bang, and the door gave